This episode of Shooting the Shiz is brought to you by 80stees.com, the leading online retailer of licensed t-shirts. They specialize in retro movie, music, TV shows, video games, comic books, wrestling, and cartoon t-shirts. So how can you help us and also buy cool t-shirts? Well, we want you to go to tinyurl.com/STS80stees. That's right. That's tinyurl.com/STS80STEES. Go there, buy some t-shirts. We get a kickback. They don't cost you no different. Now to the show.
Have you not listened to episode 17? It's my good old buddies Dustin Starr and Gene Jackson joining me to talk about Jerry the King Lawler. Wrestling with the King, episode 17. Here's a clip. Download it and listen to it.
And I think it was actually the first time as well that I ever wrestled Superstar Bill Dundee. And so I remember thinking, oh man, here's my big chance. I get to finally work with Lawler and Memphis Wrestling. Well, Bill Dundee beat me with a sunset flip. And I remember that it didn't go exactly the way we wanted because Bill, he couldn't quite, jump over me like he wanted to, I guess. And when I got to the locker room, he said, damn, kid, you could have bent down a little further. He blamed it on me.
Yeah, sure.
And so I remember going into the pay window and for the first time ever, Jerry Lawler writing me a check. First of all, I was excited that I was getting paid, but it was a big mark-out moment for Lawler to write my name on the check. And I even thought about, taking a picture of it or not cashing it and saving it and all that kind of stuff. It was so ridiculous at the time, but it was really big for me. And also got on Memphis Wrestling for one of the first times. But first time wrestling the King, you mentioned the Beale Street Posse earlier, and it was Beale Street Posse versus Jerry Lawler and Brian Christopher. So that was from Memphis Wrestling. We taped it in Dyersburg, if you remember Sir Mo from Men on a Mission, and of course Derek King.
Yeah, You got a story for that. We're going to save that one story. There's a great story.
Oh boy.
But we'll save that for the next time I bring you just on for the full 30 minutes. But yeah, go ahead.
There's a bunch of crazy stories, but Mo and Derek.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Let's start the party.
Episode 70. That's right. We're all the way up to episode 70. It is Tuesday, and we're live from STS Studios. A quick programming note, if you downloaded last week's countdown, Cool Kids Countdown, and it sounded like a flashback show, you downloaded the wrong one. So go back and listen to it. I've got it. Thanks to Lance. Lance actually caught it at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we just had a very few downloads that messed up there. So go back. We got the real one up now. I want to do a special shout out and a thank you to Bob McGee, Pro Wrestlers Between the Sheets, and that's www.pwbts.com. We also are back being syndicated a lot of our shows on Wrestling to the Max website, and that's w2mnet.com. That's w2mnet.com. Sean Garmer over there, and Locals to Legends, Gene Jackson at www.locals2legends. Thanks, guys. We do appreciate that. It does help. And wow, that Kenny Bolin episode, Off the Chains, it actually went yesterday, Monday, went over 50K downloads. Thank you. Thank you is all I can say. And no, we won't have controversial episodes every time. As you can tell by this episode, it's not very controversial. Hey, guys. If you want to get a hold of me or want to follow me, I'm at Comic Book Mark BT. I'm also at BT Shooting the Shiznit on Instagram. That's at Comic Book Mark BT at Twitter. We also have a Facebook page, Shooting the Shiznit. We also have a Facebook page for the Cool Kids, and that's the Cool Kids Wrestling and MMA Talk Facebook group. If you want to listen to a bunch of old episodes, we're at www.stspod.club, and I'll put photos and all kinds of other stuff up on that website. If you were an old reader of the Wrestling Riot website, all the old posts are up there on there too. iTunes, Stitcher, Player FM, Pod Paradise, Spreaker, we're everywhere. I want to thank Suplex City Limits, Creative Control, my buddies over there, Who's Right Podcast. That's the, I should say, the only one that's not wrestling that I recommend, but I'm now recommended Wide Men Don't Jump. Now, Tom Robinson was on the episode talking about various things and talking about his new project, and that's his new project. Look it up on iTunes, Wide Men Don't Jump. Hey, guys, let's get to the episode. I hope you enjoy it. Remember, we're the best little wrestling podcast. Oh,
from the green room, Steve Beverly. He's been in there eating those milk and cookies, and you know, Steve, I don't know if you're drinking, man, but on that refrigerator there to the left, I've got some Budweiser. So come on and join me.
Hey, it's good to be with you, Brian.
Steve, it's I always call everybody my old buddies, and you are one of my old buddies. We both were putting out newsletters, and we'll get into all that, but gosh, it's been forever since we actually talked on the phone. We did some conversation with Twitter, and we'll talk about Lance and such in a little bit. But I'm excited. I've got all these friends of mine that I made because of wrestling. And I like to bring them on and us talk about the good old days because some of these young whippersnappers, they have no idea the troubles we went through just to get our wrestling news, you know?
You know, Brian, the interesting thing is a lot of these young ones don't know what a whippersnapper is.
Well, you know, this goes all over the world, so I thought I would introduce them to words like whippersnapper, wash, you know, you wash your clothes. And you drink, we drink sodies here in this area of the South, so not sodas, but sodies, so.
In South Georgia, it was a soda water.
Soda water, yeah. I was working hotels forever, and I had some guy call down and said he wanted, 2 a.m., he wanted a face towel. I had no idea, Steve, what a face towel was. I went in there and I looked. I said, it's got to be the smallest one. And I said out loud to myself, that's a wash rag. What is this guy doing? All right, let's quit talking about myself. Let's get to talk about you. Now, Steve, we have like a super secret group that has got some of us old-timers in there, and we talk about wrestling now, believe it or not, and some stuff that happened. But they were excited about Matt Watch was your newsletter, and I want to go back there, and then we'll talk about the years, and then we'll come back to what you're doing now, and then I want to talk about some of the older stuff that happened during that. Now, how long did you do Matt Watch?
4 years. It was from 88 to 92, and the one thing that you find out when you have a regular job, and probably if I had it to do all over again, Brian, I probably would not have made it a weekly because I found out that it was just, at some point in time, it does have an ability to almost swallow up your life if you have a regular job, which I did at that point in time. And then when I went back to daily television news in 1990 and became a news director again, I recognized that it took me 2 years to get to that point, but it finally hit a stage where I realized I just could not continue with this. And also, I, you know, this is something maybe we can talk about as well, because it's something I am very much an advocate about and a warrior on now. But in 1991, I had the first of 3 bouts with depression, and it was really, and anybody who's ever experienced depression knows that it takes a toll on you, not just emotionally, but physically. And so I finally made a decision in 92 to let it go. And then at that point in time, of course, if you may remember, I was on the WCW hotline.
Yeah, I've got some questions about that. People were asking about that, but yeah, go ahead.
And then after that period ended, then Lance recruited a significant number of us over to what became the Wrestling Observer hotline, and we did that for about another 3 to 4 years, and then I really backed away from professional wrestling because, you know, and I get everybody has their own preferences as to what they enjoy and what they don't. I personally did not like the direction that the industry was going in, and some of the storylines were they were inconsistent with what I am. And so I just felt like this is a time for me to just walk away, and that's what I did. Some people say it's almost like what people have difficulty doing when they walk away from smoking or some kind of you know, something that takes a toll on your health. But for me, I just felt like it was the right thing to do, and I did. But you know, I had some very good years and interesting years, and I certainly did find myself on an adventure while doing Matt Watch. It was really created. The idea in mind was to be an alternative to what my good friend Dave Meltzer was doing, and of course, Wade Keller was doing a wonderful job with the Pro Wrestling Torch. But I was a broadcaster, and so I was trying to focus more on the broadcasting side and ratings and things that are more interesting as far as somebody who wants to keep up with how the television performance was really affecting the evolution of professional wrestling at that point in time. And so that was the niche I was carving out at that point. And it was a lot of fun to do, but I will tell you, it took up so much time in addition to a regular job. It was like having 2 jobs. And at some point in time, if you can't make that your exclusive focus, and you can't do it the way that you feel like is going to maintain quality with it, then it's time to give it up.
Yeah, I mean, being a weekly, that was one of my questions there, going through your mind. I mean, we had the Observer that everyone was a fan of. Dave was God to all of us, you know, when it came, and still is to a certain point with people that still follow. Dave always put out a quality newsletter that a lot of us followed and believed almost, you know, he turned us on to so much stuff, Japanese wrestling and things. And then later on, as we kept reading Observer, I think, probably the last, I've become a huge fan again, probably the last 6 or 7 years. You know, still watched wrestling, but just the, you know, highlights of pay-per-views and stuff. But got back to watching stuff in weekly. And I noticed getting back to the Observer, I don't agree with most of what Dave says now. I was one of his followers for a long time. But Dave is, you know, some of what he does I agree with, true, but there's a lot of things where it just shakes my head, and I go, man, how did it, you know, I'm still a star person and when it comes to match ratings and stuff like that, and I scratch my head and say, what was he watching? I was watching, so it's kind of fun with that now. But yeah, what were you? I mean, here's, you know, Steve Beverly going to do Matt Watch. These other 2 guys are, you know, Wade was number 2, but in reality, he was number 2, way behind Meltzer. So, but he was the second one. And what made you think, hey, you know, and it's not egotistical, but at what point did you say, hey, I can compete with these guys, or I can be alternative, I can be a supplement to what they're doing? What made you want to go weekly like they were doing?
Well, I was a little crazy. And I really was. I just really, I think I underestimated the amount and volume of time that it would take to do that as a weekly, but I'm one of these people that has a tendency to bore in and try something that, sometimes maybe you hit a brick wall after a while and say, this is not the thing that I should have been doing. And probably if I had it to do over, I probably would have done a bi-weekly or a bi-monthly, I should say, or a monthly. But it really was, because so much, particularly if you look in that era, Brian, in the late 80s, when we were having so many transformations happening so fast, and you had Bill Watts' UWF that a lot of people were hoping was going to be a major player in the game at that point in time, and Bill was undercapitalized to do what he attempted to do, and so then he sells to Jim Crockett, and then Jim Crockett frankly has to file for bankruptcy because he can't make it at the level he was doing. And so it took somebody with the kind of dollars that Turner Broadcasting was, that really had the ability to come forward with. And I knew some people in that company. And so really at that point in time, I made a decision to plunge into this right around the time when they had that, what now is a legendary Sunday night card at the Omni, in which Turner executives were there in the luxury box with people from Jim Crockett Promotions, and that's where really the decision was made to go forward, and that Turner was going to take over controlling interest in the company. And those are the kind of things that I had a personal interest in, particularly from the broadcasting side of it, because I was aware that it really became very, very evident that the traditional promoters who were trying to go national to compete with Vince McMahon did not have the dollars to do that, and so it was going to take the money of a major broadcaster and a major player in the game if anybody was going to at least make a strike at that. So when that happened, I said, "Oh, okay, I'm going to try doing a newsletter and just see how it works and go from there." And so for 4 years, I did it. But as I say, one of the major reasons for giving it up after 4 years was, I can tell you, when you have an experience with something like depression.
Oh, we discussed I have an episode where we were discussing it, and I have shared a little bit, not a lot here on the, but I have suffered from depression on and off. And really didn't know what it was when I was younger, but do now. And I have triggers that keep me out of it. Let's just put it that way. That's the best way to put it. I try my best to stay positive and try my best to stay busy, and that seems to keep me from. But I understand what you're saying, and everyone that's listening that understands depression understands you said I was tired. That's what's coming through. I don't know if you exactly said that, but in my mind, depression, the word tired is one of those things where you're going, and when it hits, it feels like you've been on a plane for the best way I can think of, 48 hours, and you've been running for 40. It's a tiredness that you would never be able to get out of. You don't think, and that's the way I feel. So that I can understand why you would want to quit at that point.
It's like running a race and you're never seeing the finish line, and then you begin to have, and I didn't discuss this then. I now do lectures about it, and am even doing some things with people in the television industry and local television news, because that's one of the most stressful professions that anybody can be in. And so I'm one of the ways that we eliminate the stigma that still, at least in some part, exists about emotional illness is to talk about it, particularly those of us who have had it. But I didn't talk about it then, and most people had no idea that I was going through this.
Right.
And so, but at that point, mine was brought on from utter physical exhaustion, and then and a lot of people don't understand that that's one warning sign that you could be going into depression about that. So it really hit a stage where, and my doctor told me, he said, you got to give up something. And he said, this is really something that you don't have to have. I mean, I will say this, it was a nice supplementary income, but I wasn't getting, certainly.
Well, that's one of our other questions. Isn't it when the doctor said wine, women, and song? I know you, Steve. You said I couldn't give up that, but I'd give up Matt Watch. So there we go.
Well, let's say I'm not one who's in that direction in that analogy that you pointed out.
I know, and that's why I said it.
Yeah, but physically, something had to give.
Right. You have to do that, yeah.
And this was, it really became a no-brainer choice as to what had to happen. And so I phased it down over the final 3 months, and to make sure that everybody got paid back if you had subscribed, and there weren't going to be enough issues to cover it. But for all intents and purposes, it was a good experience. It's one that, as I say, I probably would do things a bit differently if I were doing it today. But at the same time, it was interesting getting to learn more about the inside of how the profession worked, and you learned who the you learned who the shakers and the movers were.
Right. And that's with me. And I want to get more into that, but that's part of. I did mine and mine was small, but I did literally small and also figuratively. We didn't have a lot, but mine was for fun. But there were those, and Davis made a life of this. Wade has made a life. There's some other guys that make a life of. So tell us when you were doing Matt Watch, and everyone was secretive about their numbers. Dave would tell me what he was getting, but that was on the phone call. We didn't have the internet to tell everybody about it. But how many subscribers do we have, Matt Watch?
Max was 1,200.
That's still, yeah. And so we did see some profit, but not counting your hours of labor. Let's don't count your hours of labor. So we did see, like you said, a nice supplement of income. And for the record, I think my highest one was 312, and mine was a lot of just trading up, issues. Okay, we're going to take our first commercial break, and we're going to be back with Steve Beverly.
Hey, I hope everyone's enjoying this episode with Steve Beverly with a special edition this coming Thursday. It's going to be part 2 of the Steve Beverly conversation. We'll sit down and talk another 30 minutes or so with Steve Beverly. Also, a programming note. There will be no new episodes the week of Thanksgiving. No Tuesday episode, no Thursday episode. But the next week, we'll be back with the Shooting the Shiznit on Tuesday, and a special edition, which will be the Cool Kids Countdown that Thursday. Now, back to the show.
All right, we're back with Steve. Steve, we were talking about making money with Matt Watch and all that. I want to step back just real quick, and I was kidding about the whippersnappers, but some of the people that read this don't understand that the evolution of fandom in wrestling and kayfabe, was the Sheik started, and we become getting news that way, and there was a small percentage of people that did that, where the internet exploded it, and everyone gets it that way. At what time? I mean, were you a fan the whole time of your life, or was this just a period of time that when you was doing Matt Watch?
No, I was a fan from, I guess, probably the time I was about 10. I grew up in South Georgia, but we had exposure to both championship wrestling from Florida with Gordon Soley, and then what was initially called big time wrestling out of Atlanta with a great announcer that unfortunately is not remembered by as many people because he faded out of the picture before the explosion, and that's Ed Capral. One of the, to be honest with you, Ed Capral was every bit the talent that Gordon Soley was, and without going into a lot of complex details, had it not been for a couple of business arrangements, Ed Capral probably would have been the voice of Georgia, later World Championship Wrestling, that was the flagship show on Turner Broadcasting. But I got into it about the time I was about 10, and around that time you had in Florida the Assassins and the Kentuckians, and of course Eddie Graham and Sam Steamboat. They were in the Missouri Mauler. They were some of the big stars there. And in Georgia, unquestionably the top stars, and they had been brought in from California, but Enrique and Alberto, and then later Ramon Torres, the Torres brothers were just unbelievable stars. And then somewhere around 1966, then Tim Woods was brought in as Mr. Wrestling. And so you had some tremendous performers that were as good as anybody in the business in the Georgia and Florida areas. So, and then I continued to follow it through the Dory Funk Jr. and the Jack Briscoe eras. For those of us who grew up around the Florida area, Jack became our icon because he was groomed and became the biggest star in the Southeast, and then ultimately became the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. So I really had followed it for about a little more than 20 years at the time that I jumped into the newsletter game.
All right. Well, that's my belief was that you was a longtime fan. And by the way, you talking about that announcer, I grabbed the 88, the 89, and 90 annual. I don't know if you did any more, but I did get those three out and take a look at some stuff. And you did an excellent story on him. So if you can find your annuals, your Matt Watch annuals from 1988, 89, 90, take a look at those guys. Here's what I remembered about Matt Watch. And I think that Matt Watch, and I'm going to pat you on the back for this, but I still believe it's part of it, is that it changed the way a lot of us looked at professional wrestling. Because up until that point, we kind of talked about ratings in Observer and other places, but we had a television person doing a newsletter that understood what the ratings meant, what a quarter meant, what a half meant. And I think it even influences today when Dave spends all this time in Observer, which it's very interesting to me because I'm part of the. I was always a business guy, business degree. So all the business part of the business was always very interesting to me. Even when I did wrestling. I did a website later on for 5 years about Memphis wrestling in the local area. Memphis still had television when everybody else didn't. This was, and I did it for 5 years, and I did sections on the ratings. And people that read that was like, I didn't get it that it was so important. And the wrestlers were like, we that many people saw us doing it. And it was interesting, the guys that were over with the ratings that really were over, that thought they were so much over with the fans. It was hilarious with that kind of stuff. But I think promoters started looking at the ratings, especially the big guys, a lot more because of your newsletter. Do you feel that way too?
Well, you're very flattering. I'm not sure that they did, but I will say this. It was interesting that there were executives who were on my subscription list, but I do think what was crucial is that particularly at that point in 87 and 88, when, and especially at that point in time when the Crockett's, before they finally sold controlling interest to Turner Broadcasting, when that classic Sting versus Flair Clash of the Champions went head-to-head against WrestleMania. When that occurred, that was really, I think, a seminal turning point for the industry where television ratings meant everything, because that Clash of the Champions, obviously, if you go back and look at it, the rating went through the roof, and it did have an impact on pay-per-view sales for that WrestleMania. Not enough that certainly it hurt it. And I think this was, I may have said 87, but it was 88. But it did have an impact on it. And so because of those kinds of things, the ratings and on the weekend shows, they began to mean everything, because this was also a period where cable television was finally beginning to get to a point of trying to be a player in national advertising sales. And at that point in time, the highest rated shows on cable, even more so than baseball and college football, because ESPN was still not in the number of homes that it is now. But the highest rated shows on cable at that point in time were professional wrestling shows. So it was also a situation where there were some advertisers national advertisers, that shied away from buying into professional wrestling because of the content of it. And yet they had the ratings, and because the demographics were relatively young, or at least young to middle-aged, ordinarily, if this was a typical entertainment program, you would find it would be a beautiful attraction for advertisers, but there were some that would not get into it. And so these were stories that were outside the realm of who was going to leave to go to this promotion or this organization, or who was going to Japan. This was something that I had a knowledge about, and it's always been the truth that if you're going to write about what you know. And so that was the kind of thing that I was trying to bring to the table, because I sensed right at that point that this was a major turning point as far as the television business side of professional wrestling. What we didn't know is just how impactful the pay-per-view market was going to be. And then the other thing that we didn't realize is how much, nobody, I don't think, foresaw that we would eventually have a Monday Night War, which was as much about attracting advertisers as it was trying to entertain the people at home. Every bit of the Raw versus Nitro battle on Monday night was a battle for advertisers.
Yes, it was a battle for advertisers, battle for ratings. That's all it was about. There's been books wrote about this, but you're 100% right with that. I agree with you. It was, and they had the money behind them to get it going. But yeah, it was about Turner knew it was a high-rated program, knew he could make money, so that was the main thing.
Well, and at that point in time, I remember at one point in time, somebody from the McMahon organization called Dave, and we were going through the ratings of the top specials that had been done, like a Clash of the Champions or otherwise, and frankly, at that point in time, Turner had the higher rated shows of all the specials, and some guy from World Wrestling Federation, as it was known at that time, called Dave, because Dave wrote about it, and he said, "You shouldn't write that. You shouldn't write about it. You shouldn't say that." Well, why shouldn't you if it's true? But,
right.
But they didn't like that at all. If it was, and particularly the McMahon organization, didn't like it at all if information came out that did not signify that they were far and away the leader. Now, yeah, they were as far as dollars that were coming into the company, but they weren't always the most popular television program as far as wrestling was concerned. And so, there were a lot of interesting stories behind the, if you will, the central story. And that's a lot of what I think we tried to do with Matt Watch.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about and I could see, a lot of especially some of the fans, the workers too, not understanding what the ratings were, and them looking at a block and saying, "Hey, I'm really popular." I remember when I was doing my newsletter, I would go to the arena, and I stole this from Dave. I would estimate the crowd and the money. You know, Dave and me being a business guy, I love that part of it. I had workers, you know, come up to me and go, "How do you know they drew $10,000 that night?" You know, well, dude, it's this many people in the building times ever what the you know, the how much they charge for admission equals an estimated gate, and all the guys were getting, you know, the promoter was making more than the wrestlers were, very much so. But I think that part of that is that the guys started also looking at the ratings and saying, you know, hey, I'm more popular than the promotion thinks. Did you ever have, and we're going to talk about more people that called you and talked to you and some other things, on part two, because we're going to have part two also on this. But my main thing would be, did you have anyone ever call you and say, hey, you know, is my ratings that good or that bad, or you don't know what you're talking about when it came to that, you know, a segment or a wrestler that was in that segment?
Not. I can't say that I had anybody to call me and doing it as if they were trying to get leverage for as far as the dollars and cents. And you know, and when I did get those calls, I said, now you got to be very careful about how you look at this, because I said it's not. I said because the fans as a whole don't know who's going to be in what matches on television. I said, you don't have a card. I said, now occasionally they'll tell you we're going to have a championship match between so-and-so. Okay, and they would usually do those things during the sweet months. And that was another thing that a lot of people didn't understand. Almost everybody does now, but that a lot of the hot angles, or although you went at one point in time 18 months on World Championship Wrestling where there were no angles of any kind, but it was, you know, when you went to it was November, July, and February and May that they would try to put their best products, because those were the months in which, even for cable networks, that local markets were being surveyed for ratings. Now you had at that point in time, probably in the late 80s, you had about maybe 25 of the mega markets around the country that had what was known as overnight ratings, which now that's almost a standard in the top 80 markets in the country now. But in short, what that really was, and if somebody did call me about that, I would say, now you got to be very careful. I said, because here it is. I said the fans at home, they don't know the order of the matches. They don't know who's going to be wrestling when, and so you can't say, well, I got this big rating right here. I said, no, the show did, because they didn't know you were going to be wrestling in a certain quarter hour. And then the other part of it is, I said, you know, when you look at this, it's also competitive scheduling. I said the show might do better one week, particularly in the fall of the year, if there's a hot college football game on another cable network, then that might affect the rating.
Right, and we still see that today. You know, Dave makes a point to say this right here was this was going on at this time, and I think I just think that that a lot of that we understood came from, you know, and still being used in the newsletters from Matt White.
But I would try, but Brian, I would try to explain that.
Right.
Got those calls, because some of them, you know, I think there were some who did want to use that as leverage to say, I ought to be making more money, I ought to get a bigger foot.
Well, Steve Beverly said, you know, because I know they've used it used to be, and we're going to end this here just in a moment. We're going over a little 30 minutes. Y'all stick with us here on this episode. But there used to be somewhat of and probably, I don't know today because I'm not backstage today, but when I was backstage in the Memphis area, always brought the Observer for, Everwho. I remember bringing it for Ken Wayne, a couple other guys all the time. They would read it, give it back to me. But there was a stigma there. They didn't want to say, Dave said, but most of the guys used, which I just mentioned that earlier, but used that Observer to see how good the business was everywhere else. And so that they would know where everyone was drawn and where they might want to go, since Memphis is not drawn very well. But, you guys, I don't believe they probably ran up to their bosses, as Steve Beverly said, because that wasn't something that that would have got over well with the boss. Okay, we're going to make it, this is going to be considered part 1. We're going to get off here and we'll have part 2 coming up. You guys, thank you for joining us on the best little wrestling podcast in the business. Same bat time, same bat channel. All right. Hey, Steve, that first one went great. Thank you.
Thank you.